Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of Mondays in MMORPGs. Woo!
Hello. Hi.
I'm Tim Anderson, aka Renfill. Here with me is co host Eloa. Hope you guys enjoyed last week's inaugural episode of the new show. I know the community members seemed to enjoy it. There's some nice comments over on the YouTube channel, and also in Discord. So thank you very much for that, folks. Today we are going to be picking up where we left off, which is discussing some of our kind of favorite stories from MMORPGs or favorite things that have happened when we've been playing games. We've got some anecdotes from the community that we'll get to, but I figured this time around, rather than me talking forever off the bat, I would let you go first
Oh,
and tell.
right.
Let's hear what is one of your favorite stories from an MMORPG, something that sticks out to you as a fun or memorable experience.
Yeah, there's many stories that happen through my lifetime of MMORPGs. I guess that the most interesting stories I still had them in World of Warcraft. That's why it has been my favorite game, and it's probably just because it's one of the first. Um, but my very first MMO was Anarchy Online. And I just stumbled upon that game because a friend of mine was playing it, and my ex boyfriend, or the father of my son, I was with at that time, were playing it as well. And something that we really enjoyed in Anarchy Online, so you can imagine that it's a pretty old game, that was in 2003. It was simply go to an adventure. So I had no idea exactly at the time what was an MMORPG and how you were supposed to play it. It was something completely new to me. So I didn't really understood the process of having to level a character to get some better equipment and all that kind of things that are obvious for MMORPG players. For me, I just had my character. I was meeting other people from everywhere in the world. That was what interested me. I could speak with them and going for an adventure. And I know that we were often doing stuff that were not what you're supposed to do if you want to play in a correct way or in a smart way for leveling your character. So we were saying, let's cross the map. And so we were going with our character and going from one point and planning to go to that other point, which was super far away, to see how long it will take us. We had to cross super high level zone with super high level mobs, and those mobs were very often dinosaur like Brachiosaurus or stuff like this, and they were red or skull, and so it was super scary. And I remember that I was so excited about just running and crossing those map and trying to avoid the mobs and not get killed, and just to see how long it was taking to run from one point to another, or like swimming through a river. There was a river in the middle of the world of Anarchy Online, and it took 30 minutes to just swim through this river. And I was excited to do that. I found it fun, and so I was just swimming for 30 minutes. So you can imagine that it's super boring, but I find it's really fun.
I think by
So
today's
yeah.
standards, yeah, there's something to be said about travel times. I don't remember if we talked about this last time on our video, but if you look at late last year, there was a bunch of reviews that came out around a series of games. They had God of War. These are all PS4 games, but I mentioned this in relation to what you're just talking about. So we had Red Dead Redemption 2, God of War, and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, all three of which basically, I'm remembering off the top of my head, you could basically turn off the compass and instead rely upon the actual directions that the NPCs were giving you. And the reviews that were coming in about these games were calling this a revolutionary. And it's not revolutionary. This is how we did things back in the first generation of MMORPGs. But people have forgotten about that type of gameplay, and so it was coming out as something that was being considered very innovative and fun and exciting because people were having to actually immerse themselves in the world. And there's something to be said for travel time. Um, and travel being meaningful, as opposed to something that many modern players look at, travel time as wasted time because I'm not advancing my character. But if you look back to games like that, I mean, I have similar stories from my first game was EverQuest, and um, in that game, the boat rides between continents were 30-minute affairs, and they were always memorable because you were stuck on a boat with, at some cases, depending on, what time of day and night and whether you were close to an expansion or not, but you would have dozens of people on a boat, sometimes hundreds at an expansion launch. Everybody's trying to cram onto this one vessel. Um, but you've got these 30 minutes where people are talking to each other and chatting with each other. And because the server architecture and everything was so kind of new, there are always little bugs and features. So the best was always, you just had to prepare yourself that once in a while, when the boat crossed his own line, you would appear in the middle of the ocean and the boat would be off in the distance, and you would
Oh
be sitting there
yeah.
going, no, like how you're just gonna have to, and the worst was like with EverQuest, um, you had corpse runs, so you could lose so like if you drowned in the ocean, it was a serious issue of like, how do I get back to find my gear and etc. But that also led to people making discoveries in the oceans because then they would have to swim to the continent. So, you're kind of following the boat because you know that it's something is off in that direction. But then people would discover these other islands, and then they would discover things at the bottom of the ocean. There was a special chamber, for example, where there was some teleportation pots that you could use to get to different places in the world. And there was also sharks, so you just kind of had to be prepared for that. But travel as an actual, if you think about travel less as an inconvenience and think about travel as an actual piece of content, I think that can help players change their perspective and have the types of experiences that you and I had back in the day. I mean, even recently, talking again about World of Warcraft Classic, one of the things that I'm enjoying at the moment, I'm only 36, and I still have quite a ways to go to have enough money to get a mount. I think I have like 30. I think I have 35 gold, but I still need a lot more to get my
Good.
first mount. But I'm not playing hardcore. I'm playing Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturday nights. I play a little bit in between there because I have box accounts, so I'm leveling up a healer alt, um, and stuff. But for the most part, I'm how long it launched in early end of September, so we're basically almost 2 months. Next Friday will be 2 months, or next Saturday will be 2 months. So next week will be 2 months. And I know many people are already level 60. They've already cleared Molten Core. They've already done all these raids and everything else. And I've been taking my time. And I can tell you that, I'm not going to be anywhere near having a mount by next Friday. And having played 2 months regularly and not having a mount when every single other game on the market gives you a mount by like the first 5 hours you've played the game, there's a couple of things that have happened. One is that I've been able to actually take the time and appreciate the work of the artists to create these zones, and I'm able to actually appreciate the art style, the art direction, the layout of the zones, the cool features like bridges and torches. And I took a really cool screenshot in, I think it was either Ashenvale or Duskwood the other day, just with the road. I think it was Ashenvale, with the road going off in the distance, my two characters on the path, and like the fog effect, so everything's fading off into the distance. But then you've got like the cool night elf torches that are lining the path. So even though you can't quite see the path in the distance, you could see a faint glow of these torches. And I just thought it was just this really cool effect. And if I had a mount or I was fast traveling, you're not seeing any of that stuff. But also, by the time I do get a mount, I will appreciate it that much more because I've been forced to hoof it for like 3 months at slow dwarf speed. So yeah, travel can be very memorable. Um,
I think it's a good point because you will see in many game or the games nowadays you have to kind of experience that people are looking for. Either they're looking for a playground where they can just play the games and have very good gameplay. They want to do dungeon, or they want to do PvP, or they want to do mini game, or whatever they want to do, but they want it fast, convenient, and they enjoying that way. Maybe a little bit like you have a fast game on a console, or something like, you have a Mario Kart race on the Switch or whatever. It's go fast and you're enjoying yourself and you don't have to do so much work. And then you have the other kind of mood, which could be to just have an adventure. And for an adventure, you need to be lost. You need to have things that are unexpected. You need to have things that are making you go out of your way, like detour, because it's when you are doing a detour that the most interesting happen, because they're not expected. They are surprising you, and because of that, they are memorable. So this is two really different mindset, and I'm not saying one is better than the other. It just depends what you want to do. If you are this type of gamer or that type of gamer, or maybe this day you want to do that and another day you want to do something different. But it's really two different things. To have something convenient that will allow you to do, like World of Warcraft retail dungeon are really well done. You have a lot of challenge. It can be exciting and very fun to do, and it will be annoying to have to do a super long travel to get to them or whatever, because what you want to do in this end game is to do a lot of dungeon fast, and have this challenge of having to go to this dungeon in 30 minutes and succeed it. And in a different time, you will maybe want just to have the exploration, the slow pace of a game where you can be lost and have adventure with your friends.
Yeah, see, I'm on the end of the equation that I've never been able to enjoy the quick runs. I like a long immersive experience, but that may be because my initial gaming, coming from a Dungeons and Dragons background of tabletop, I appreciate those, 4 to 6 hour sessions. Also in EverQuest 1, I mean, it was always you were always going to spend that amount of time. If you were going to have
Hmm.
the time to log in and get together, put together a dungeon group, you were going to be online for 4 to 6 hours because it was going to take you probably an hour to get the group formed up, everybody get their supplies together, and then get to the dungeon. So you're at least going to lose an hour there, and then you've got 3 or 4 hours minimum of dungeon time, and then from there getting back. Obviously, it got a little bit easier as you got higher in level because people got access to speed buffs and teleports and things of that nature. But I've always appreciated the bigger dungeons, the longer runs as opposed to the speed runs. Although I will say that we did Scholar Monastery Library and Armory last night, and we went in and we had a DPS heavy group, and we got done with the library, and we looked at the clock and it was like, did we really just do that in 12 minutes? Like it just we had such a DPS heavy group, and we were like level 36 to 39, so we're slightly higher than we needed to be for that
Mm-hmm.
place, but we just blew through it and got done, and it was like, didn't it take us like 45 minutes the last time we were in here? But we'd leveled like 3 or 4 levels since we went in there last time, and so we just blew through it. And then we went and did the armory, and we were done with the armory in 30 minutes. And it was like that took us like an hour and a half the first time we were in here. So it's interesting to see how even just a slight thing like a level difference can help you clear the zone. I think we're going back to do the cathedral again Saturday night, and I know the first time we did cathedral it took us about 2 hours, but that's like level 30, has 38 to 40 mobs in it. We were all like level
Hmm.
34, so it was a bit of a challenge for us. So we'll see how it is now. But I want to tell one of my stories real quick, and then we'll get to some of the community stories. Um, I've told this to some people. Anybody who's sat around and talked to me long enough has probably heard this story. But for those of you who are new to the channel or stuff, it's my favorite EverQuest story. Um, it was not the very first character I created. The very first character I created was a high elf wizard whose name I cannot remember. And I remember trying to level that character, and the game was brand new. I did not play from launch, but I started a couple of months after launch. I heard about it. I was in line at the first Star Wars convention in Denver, Colorado, and I was in line at the Lego store getting ready to drop like $700 on Legos. And these guys behind me and I got to talking. We were talking about D&D, the Star Wars role-playing game, and then we started talking about Baldur's Gate and computer games. And they were like, "Have you tried this new game that just came out called EverQuest?" And I think EverQuest had come out like literally the month before. And so I very literally went out and got high-speed internet. Was very lucky to live in a place that had broadband very early on. So 99, I had a AT&T broadband connection. Started a wizard and I got him to like level 3 or 4. I don't really remember. It was very low level. He was still fighting stuff outside of the high elf city of Felwith, and I was like, I can't do this. Like he just kept dying over and over and over, and he was too weak. So I was like, screw this. So I made a wood elf ranger, and the ranger stuck with me for some reason. And I played for days and got into the game and got up to around level 9, and I'd been playing a lot of basically solo adventuring by that point. I'd been going around killing, the skeletons and all the little things, orc pawns and lieutenants. Had a couple of small groups doing the orc hill. Had ran around and turned in orc crushbone belts and the like, and was just exploring the game world. And I'm a couple of weeks in by this point, um, and I've basically earned enough coin from doing runs and selling rusty weapons to buy a set of basically, I think it was chainmail or bandit, I don't remember, from the NPC. Like I didn't even know about player crafted gear at that point. Like I just knew that I was able to find the NPC, and the NPC had armor that I wanted. So I went ahead and bought that gear, and I got fully decked out, and I was uh, talking with somebody after I had done that, and he was explaining to me like, oh, there's this place over on the other side of the world, over by the city called Kinos, where there's these knolls, and you should try that out as well. So this is before EQ Atlas. This is before the internet was. This is 99, so it was still fairly early on. So literally, the way that he explained it to me, he's like, go get the world map from your game box. So I went and got it, and he's like, okay, see here's where we are. You got to get over here to the other side of the map. And I was like, okay. So he's like, I literally wrote down the directions. He's like, you want to go here, go to Butcherblock Mountains, go follow the road, take a right here, go left past Caledon, get to the docks, take the boat. It's going to be a 30-minute ride. Don't get off at any of the islands. Get to Freeport. Here's how you get through Freeport. Get to the Common Lands, run across, get to the forest, go through the forest, blah, 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 blah. So he gave me all these detailed directions. A couple of things he didn't explain. One was that Kithakor Forest turns into undead at night. So when I get to Kithakor Forest, it's nighttime, and all these players like camped outside the zone line. I'm like, what's going on? Like, oh well, everything turns to undead at night, so we gotta wait for the morning to come. So I was like, okay, so hung out and waited. Had some good role play and some good adventures. Then was able to get through the forest in the morning and get to um, the the pass, which is through the mountains. The second thing he hadn't explained to me was that I was going to need some sort of invisibility to get through the pass. So I get to the pass, I run in, I take off down the canyon, and smack, I'm dead by orcs who are like level 20 plus, and I'm like level 9. Loading, please wait. I wake up all the way back in Kelethan, naked, no gear. No one had ever told me about binding your spirit in different locations. So I literally was back where I had started. And by that point, I'd been traveling for a couple of game sessions. I'd put about 9 hours into getting there because, it was all you learning it as you went and exploring and fighting your way. And so to wind up back where I started with no gear and just like my world was crushed. Like was like, this is just like all the gear I bought, like all my money's gone, all my gear's gone. I'm a naked wood elf back in my home city, and I remember just sitting there like just furious, like and depressed and upset and everything else. A 19-year-old kid. I'm like, nah. And here's this gnome or this dwarf and barbarian, a cleric and shaman. I can't remember his. I remember Gnostic was the name of the dwarven cleric. I cannot remember the name of the the barbarian shaman. But they were role playing, and they were like, "Why are you naked by the lift? Did you have a mishap?" And so I told them what had happened. I role played with them, and then, within like 30 minutes, I was in their guild. They had crafted me a full set of banded armor, and that was my start of like the group based experience in MMORPGs. And within 2 weeks, I was an officer in their guild, and within 6 months, we were raiding and having role play events, and just that kind of was the start of that adventure. But that always comes back to me is that I learned a lot of valuable lessons from that experience. One is which don't ever go anywhere without binding your spirit. Two, always make sure you have a set of backup gear so that if something happens, you've got backup gear to help you out in those situations. And three, it's good to make friends because friends are the ones who can help you get out of shitty situations like that in the first place. So all of which are valuable experiences to the MMORPG uh, lifestyle, I should say. Um, Making friends is good. But I know we've had a couple of comments from community members, and I'm gonna tab over here and look at one of them. Actually, I'll do this on my phone because that way I don't have to minimize anything here that I'm working on. Dun, dun, dun. So in Discord, somebody had said, at ArcAge's original launch, this is Adric Lives. He says, I played pretty heavily and got into one of the better guilds in my faction, which was basically East versus the West. The other faction dominated the PvP landscape, but on the launch of Castles, our guild managed to steal one of the initial castle spots from the big Western guilds. At some point, we had to defend the castle from an assault from the West, which was an instance encounter. He says he can't remember if it was 100 versus 100 or 50 versus 50, but either way, that's a pretty big brawl. He said having to man turrets, make offenses to break their catapult line, watching the walls fall as their Zerg offenses poured into our inner defenses. It was an amazing and memorable experience. Ultimately, we lost, and the West won control of all the castles, but it was an epic experience running around the ramparts, knocking people off the castle, AoEing the siege tower and everyone inside of it, and etc. He says, I have a lot of stories like this with this that I remember fondly. Small stuff sometimes like an item someone passed down to me. Ooh, this is a good one. Small items passed down to me which made a huge impact. For example, I remember the Walrus Tooth handout, which started my journey to playing my rogue in EverQuest for years because it was just a random guy who was running by the Neric newbie log who gave this poor newbie this weapon, and this random act of kindness from a stranger just started this whole journey. That's an interesting, because I've heard other people talk about similar situations like that where they weren't sure what they wanted to play in an MMORPG, and it's just a random act of somebody coming by and like giving them a shield or a weapon or something that made them like, well, now I want to play this character because now I want to be able to use this cool item that it's unlocked all of this potential for this class for me. Whereas before I was running around struggling trying to figure out how to kill wolves, or skeletons or something. Um, I think it's those little things. Did you ever in World of Warcraft? I know that there was a big difference because I never played vanilla, and you did. I'm playing classic many years later. So I know you had said there's a difference in how the community is today compared to where they were back
Yeah.
then. But one of the things I remember very fondly from EverQuest 1 was buff parties where guilds would like come into a zone and they would just run around buffing all of the newbies, or they would have like 4 or 5 high level guys who would just hang out in a low level area and they would shout or do OOC into the channels and be like, hey, I'm giving out buffs at this location, and people would run over because it's a 30-minute buff that gives you like 500 hit points. Did they do that kind of stuff in?
There was nice things in World of Warcraft back in the days too, but it was not as obvious as it was with the release of Classic, because it's like in Classic, uh, it's like everyone really want to experience this beautiful experience, and so they want to have everyone having the best experience possible. So it's like people were having extra care for being polite to each other, helping each other, because they remember back in the days it was, it's like all veteran going back into something, and so they have this sort of kindness and fondness about what happened, which you didn't have back in the days, obviously, because back in the days it was new, and so you had nice people and you had assholes, like you can expect. And yes, so you had some nice person. I remember, for example, on a roleplay server, I had organized a charity market. So the my guild, which was a night elf only guild, went into the newbie zone to craft material ancient stuff for new players. And we were offering gear and stuff like that. But that was a guild event, it was a role play event, etc. And this was the kind of stuff I was doing very often. Now I remember other stories which are on the opposite. Like I had a friend, which is a lovely friend in real life, but in game, is the kind of guy you will make in your blacklist because he came from Ultima Online and he was a kind of griefer kind of person,
Yeah.
that's trapping other people to steal their stuff. And I remember that we were in a party and there was a staff that dropped and someone needed on it while he didn't need on it. And it was a bind on equip item, so you could sell it. And that friend was demanding to the guy, because he won that stuff that he didn't need, to equip it in front of everyone. So he was sure that he could not sell it.
This actually
So
ties into something that happened to us last night. In the aforementioned Scarlet Monastery run, we typically run with only guild members in our groups. But last night, there was a high level group doing. I don't remember the name of the place. The initials are ZM, like Zolmaurik or something like that. Um, they were off running a high level dungeon, and then we had three of us who were in our mid 30s wanting to do something, and then other people who were in their early teens. And so we were like, we want to go do a run. Let's just pick up a couple of pickup people. And we had a warrior in the group who came as DPS, and um, he was very frustratingly needing on every single item that dropped. And when questioned about it, this is your typical, he just refused to answer. And we were halfway through the dungeons, at this point, and it's like, well, do we kick him or do we just finish it off and just say, screw it, it's just loot? And so we just said, screw it, it's just loot, and finished the dungeon. But at the same time, when we finished, uh, we all kind of sat down and said, if we ever do this again, with pickup people and we see someone who is consistently needing on every single item when they don't really need it, they're just going to vendor it. My initial gut reaction is the first couple of times he needed it, I literally inspected him to see if he had equipped the items, because I'm like, he's level 39 and he's rolling on leather items and he's a tank. Why is he rolling
yeah,
on leather? And I'm expecting him. He hasn't equipped these items. They're not better than what he has. So what's going on here? But that in action, I want to see you equip it right now if you're gonna need on it. But I think our ultimately we decided that if that ever happens again, we're just gonna boot the person and find somebody different. Because that kind of stuff, for us, we're there to. It should be everyone the typical need before greed thing. If you really need it to equip it, need on it. Otherwise, greed it and it goes to everybody equally.
yeah, exactly.
But the new mentality, the new school mentality is, well, I need it for my mount, so therefore I'm going to roll on everything because I need the gold. And it's like, you're not an old school player. You don't really understand what need before greed is supposed to be about. Because I remember, I don't know if it was like this in old school World of Warcraft, but in old school EverQuest, we didn't have a need before greed loot system. So it was
Yeah, just need,
literally,
yeah.
it was literally, it dropped, and what you would do is you would literally do the / roll 100. I think in EverQuest it might have been random 100 or something, but it would, you would roll the dice, and whoever got the highest roll would win the item. So everyone who needed it would roll. And typically the way it would work is if you were in a group of like 6 people, if you won something, then you were automatically out for the next item. And then whoever won the next item is automatically out for the third item. And you would just do that until all 6 people got an item that they could use as an upgrade. And then you would repeat the process, and all 6 would begin rolling again. Um, but it was also, everybody kind of policed themselves, and it was that's also far enough back in the day where we actually had server blacklists where if somebody ninja looted an item, you took a screenshot and put it on the forums, and nobody would group that person because they were known to be a ninja looter. Um,
Hmm.
those kind of things, you don't have to do that anymore because of systems like this, where theoretically a need before greed system that automatically rolls the loot for you helps avoid nasty situations, but then you still have people like the guy from last night who are going to need on every single item that drops.
And you have also now the system in most game where everyone gets some loot automatically.
In the newer systems, yeah.
You don't even need to roll for anything because everyone will get something, a reward, which is nice. When it first came out, I was happy that it happened because I say, oh, this will avoid so many discussion because I had been through, especially as a organizer, guild
Oh
leader, red
yeah.
leader, whatever. I had spent so many time and energy to discuss why I give this item to that person and not to that one and whatever. And so I was happy when I think it's Guild Wars 2 that was the first one to have these things. Finally, no more discussion. This is good. But it removes also something. So it's nice because everyone get loot, but like we were saying in the last episode, you do not have a good story to tell when everyone get its loot
Yeah, you don't
because
have
never.
you didn't have to grind it for 30 runs. Like you didn't have to come in there 30 times and run the same instance with your
Yeah,
friends and get
and you don't
yeah.
you never have trouble. Like the story I just told you about the loot and the guy who forced equip this stuff to the mage, it's a story to tell. I remember that very well, and this never can happen when everyone got some piece of loot. And I must say that I never remember anything like, oh my god, I got this item,
Yeah.
may it be in Elder Scrolls Online or Guild Wars 2, because
Nope.
I never cared about the
You
loot.
don't care about the loot. This brings me back to our guild when Vanguard first launched. We'd been in alpha and beta for a couple of years by that point. And when it went live, we were primed and ready to just take over. And we were the number one or number two guild on our server, depending on who you talked to. But we were getting all the world firsts for this. I think it was called the Celestine Ward armor sets, and we were getting world firsts on these other armor sets that I can't remember the name of on the other side of the world too. But anyway, the Celestine Ward ones were the ones that I really remember because we spent 6 weeks basically getting our entire guild equipped out in full sets, and it was just basically 6 weeks of playing every single day for 4 to 6 hours a day. And I was doing crazy stuff. Like on weekends, I was getting up at 6 in the morning and I was playing from 6 to noon. I was playing a 6 hour session, then I was taking a break, and I was coming back at 2 and playing until 6, and then I would take a break and come back at 8 and play until midnight. I did that with Saturdays and Sundays, and then on the weekdays I would play like 4 to 6 hours every night. So we were playing a lot of hours in, but we got all 35 of our guild members full sets of that gear, got world firsts on pretty much every single drops in those zones, all the quests, and then I ended up with like the world first best shield in game for the warrior um, after completing all of these quest lines and everything else, which was a really cool moment because I got the shield, and not only am I world first on it, but it's like 6 weeks of backbreaking, you know, tons of hours of playing. But then it was like, you're primed and ready to go, and your whole guild's equipped in gear. Everybody's ready to go on to the next phase. That kind of stuff, you really appreciate the gear you've got because it's going to last for a long time. But also because you work so hard for it. And when you have like the system where you were just describing, excuse me, where um, it's just given to you because you were there. This goes back to the. I'm sure that you talk about this in Europe. I know it's a big controversial thing in the United States, which is the this newer generation of people who get medals and awards. We call it participation trophies. So it's like you're a kid and you go to this race or this ball game or a football game
Mhm.
or something, and instead it used to be you only got an award if you won. So it inspired people to do good and to work hard and play their hardest to be a team player and try to achieve a goal. But now you show up and you just get a ribbon and you get a participation trophy, and so it's removed this sense of accomplishment because there is no
Mhm.
accomplishment anymore. It's like
Yeah.
every kid gets a trophy. Like, what? Why? And that's how these games work these days too. On the one hand, it does obviously inspire everybody to want to play it because everybody gets to feel good, but it takes away, like you said, um, that sense of accomplishment. And I don't know. I know World of Warcraft had epic quest lines. So this is a chance for me to segue into the next topic that we're going to discuss
Mhm.
today. In EverQuest 1 and also EverQuest 2, we had epic weapons quests. And I don't know if World of Warcraft had something along those lines in the early days of the game. I know they had like the AQ quests
Yes.
and like these epic, like world-based server events where everyone has to participate to unlock the next expansion content, which is something that we're very much interested in doing with Saga of Leucemia. But when I look back to the epic weapon quests of EverQuest, it makes me think about this next topic, which is expansions in games and what are some of our favorite expansions. And I know we were actually just talking about this the other night in Warcraft as well. The For me, the favorite expansions that stand out to me are the ones that require me and my guild to spend hundreds of hours to get through the content and finally get to the end. So, thinking of the epic weapons quests for uh, Kunark, the very first epic 1.0s for EverQuest. I mean, it took me 2 years on my 2 years. Think about that for a minute. 2 years on my ranger to get my epic weapons, my swords, because we were not a full-time raid guild. We were a role play guild that raided twice a week, and we also had a role play alliance. And so, you've got 80 to 100 people in that alliance, and everyone needs drops. And there's like 10 other rangers competing, and you're not always going to the zone that the rangers need. So you're doing rotations. So and it just also depends on where everyone's at for the day and how big your raid force is on a given night as to what you can accomplish that night. So it took me about 2 years of going to raids and participating and everything else before I finally got my epic weapons. But that for me, that journey, I still had a hell of a lot of fun in between playing the content of that game. But there was definitely a moment when I finally had both those swords in my hands. And I was like, yes, like, it's like I've accomplished this feat. And the same thing with EverQuest 2. The expansion that stands out to me in EverQuest 2, um, not that Kunark is my favorite expansion for. I'll get back to that in a minute. But my favorite expansion for EverQuest 2 was the Runes of Kunark, which had the mythical weapon quest lines, which were these epic quest lines. It took our guild about 6 months to get through all the storyline and to get everyone in the guild equipped. And we had about 40 people in the guild at that point, which is more than you need for the raid force, but we had our A list and our B list, and we got everybody equipped. But that took about 6 months um, to get everybody in the mythical weapons. But having a progression in place where there's 6 months of content where you're chewing on it every single day, to me that kind of stuff is really impressive. Um, my favorite expansion of all time for EverQuest 1 was Plains of Power. It's not the most memorable one to me. The Velius expansion is the most memorable to me for just the ice giants and farming Kale armor and then Sky Shrine armor and so on and so forth. Um, and Velk's Labyrinth getting gems, but the Plains of Power, because you were having to literally take on the gods and you were going through each plane of existence, going through the plane of justice and the plane of time and all this other stuff, and you needed a big raid force to do it, and it was a very clear progression path. Um, that was something that took our guild about a year to work through. And then I look at today's expansions where I haven't played a game. Every single game I've played in probably the last 10 years, I've been able to clear the expansion content within like 3 weeks. maybe 6 weeks at most, and I'm done with all the content. And then it's what? I'm going to sit there and repeat dailies every day. So I don't know about you. Like
Hmm.
like when I think about expansions, the ones that stand out to me as some of my favorite are the ones that are giving me 6 months to a year. Like
But
and I was playing hardcore at that time. So to get 6 months out of a game when you're playing 40 hours a week, that's a lot of content.
it's not exactly true. There is a lot of content, but it's not shown in the same way. First of all, you have a difference between two type of game, which are the horizontal progression game, like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy 14 or EverQuest, I guess. And then you have the horizontal game like Guild Wars 2 and Elder Scrolls Online. I will take those example of game because that's the one I know the best. And then the meaning of an expansion is completely different. In a game like Elder Scrolls Online, for instance, the expansion, that's why they call it a chapter and not an expansion, is just an addition to the game. So it's like a new book. You do not need to do the base content first. You can start immediately by the newest expansion or the newest chapter if you want. Or you can do it at your convenience. It doesn't really matter because everything you will have is that you will level your character, you will unlock your champion points, which is the second progression system. You will find some equipment, and you find it in this area or in that area, in this dungeon or that one dungeon. It doesn't matter because you will have good equipment anywhere. And if you want to nitpick, then you will really select the places where you want to have the perfect equipment for your perfect build. It doesn't matter. So that's a certain type of game, which allow a lot of flexibility, a lot of replayability, and you can jump in whenever you want. You don't have to stress to do all content in a certain order. You do like you want, and also the content is never obsolete. So this is really cool. In a game like World of Warcraft, with a horizontal progression, no vertical progression, you have to go through the base game, then you have to go through expansion 1, expansion 2, expansion 3 to level up, and then you finally arrive into the lastest expansion. So how does a last expansion happen in a game like World of Warcraft? Final Fantasy have a similar structure. So first of all, you need to get the max level. So you need to do the new leveling from the last expansion to the end of the next one. So let's say you were level 100 and now you need to be level 110. You have to do all the story content. And generally, that doesn't take too much time. It can be, like, I would say, a good week if you play well, intensively, but regularly, without stress. If you are very farmer, you can, do it in 2 days or less. But normal players will probably do all of that content within a week. But that's the story, that's the leveling. After you unlock the end game. So you need to firstly do certain dungeon so you can get a certain type of equipment that unlock you to do the next dungeon, which gives you a better equipment. Then you are ready for starting the red when the red is released. And it goes by patch. So every patch, it's like a mini expansion. So you have the first patch that open one red. So you have to catch up with your equipment. You do the red. You have generally several versions of the same red with several degree of difficulty. So you need better equipment every time. Then you will have the new patch. The new patch will open a new way of obtaining gear. It will also open a way of catching up faster if you arrive in the middle of the expansion. So you don't have to go through all of the dungeon and everything that you had to do before. So something to speed up a little bit the process. So you can catch up with your friend and start to do the progression for the new raid. And it will always be that way. So within one single expansion, you will have several patches. Generally, it's like 4 or 5. And each of those patches is like a mini expansion with always a new tier of reds
And you're
with new
saying
equipment to obtain.
this is the new way that these companies are doing things, right? Because
Uh,
the way that
yeah.
I'm familiar with has always been, and granted, I have not been, I mean, I still play games these days, but I still play them kind of like the old school way. So I've been playing a lot of old school games. I've been playing a lot of progression servers the past few years. So I'm not really up to date with, like, for example, I don't play Final Fantasy 14. I've dabbled. I don't play World of Warcraft retail. I don't play Guild Wars 2, although I have dabbled in Guild Wars 2. So I've never been. So it sounds to me like what you're saying. Um, you've got official expansion packs that happen like what, once a year, I'm assuming.
It's 2 years generally. It's every 2 years
Okay, so
that you have an expansion.
every couple of
And
years a major expansion, but then content drops in between. Whereas the
yes,
old way of doing things was always just every couple of years, here's an expansion with just tons of stuff to do. Go out and have fun for the next couple of years while we're building the next thing. Um, so this brings me to a question I have, because I think you and I have maybe briefly discussed this between ourselves in the past. Um, I know that most games don't require, and people call it different things, flagging, getting keyed, um, but basically a system whereby I think Final Fantasy did it for a while, but now they're letting you bypass it. But basically, like, you can't you can't do content drop number 10 until you've first done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Um, and you have to do them in succession in order to get to that 10th zone. In, say, EverQuest or EverQuest 2, it was what we would call flags. So you would need to get your character flagged for a certain zone by doing a series of quests, which would then gain you access to the zone. You could then do that encounter, which would then unlock access to the next encounter, which would then unlock access to the next
yeah,
encounter, and so on and so forth.
I think what you're saying, and that you had in World of Warcraft before, which was called attunement. So in World of Warcraft, in the two first expansion or in the base game, Vanilla and Burning Crusade, they were doing a little bit different in the sense where they had their content dropping by patch, of course, like Onyxia Red and then Blackwing Lair and then Axaramas. But you were forced to go first to Onyxia to get your fire resistant gear so you could work on Blackwing Lair, or you had to do a long quest to open the door of whatever, you had to go through that red, and you were forced to do that, which is cool in a certain way because you have a progression to go through, but it has caused another problem, which is the guild hopping. So what you have is that you have the best guilds that are far away in the content, and then you have the slow guilds that are still working on the first thread because that's what they are doing. So they're recruiting, they have players, and then the players at some point say, oh, well, I get all my equipment. No, I'm leaving the guild and I'm going in that better guild because they got all the flagging. So this poor little guild that were working so hard to have their people and to work through the content, they got all their best player that are just guild hopping to just have their promotion, so to speak. So in Wrath of the Lich King, World of Warcraft has done differently is that every patch, the content is becoming quite obsolete, which is sad in a way because you do not need to do the first raid anymore. You can catch up with your equipment by doing some dungeon, for instance, or some special quest or some special dailies or whatever. So you have a way of catching up faster. But it brings some convenience, which are nicer on the social point of view, meaning that if you start the game later, well, you can get your gear faster and then jump immediately into the content you want with your friend. Or if you make an alt or whatever, it's easier and you do not have to go through, you're not forced to go through the content.
I will say that having seen the guild hopping back in their early EverQuest days, one of the first things that I did when I became a guild leader many years ago, I set myself up as the raid tank because that was the one thing I saw that had happened to a couple, like two or three of the guilds I was in, was we would get 6 or 8 months into the progression, and then our tank would just decide that, well, I'm getting a better offer from this guild
Mm-hmm.
over here, so I'm going to go over there, and then suddenly our whole raid is screwed because we no longer have a raid equipped tank. So I set myself up as the main tank, And I've done this. I'm playing the main tank now for the guild in World of Warcraft Classic. Whether or not we're not in a rush to get to raid content, and we've actually already seen that in our guild. Like within the first 2 weeks, we had 6 players who left the guild within the first 2 weeks because within 10 days they were already level 50 and all of us were like level 15, and they were like, well, we want to be raiding and doing molten core within the first 3 weeks of the game or 4 weeks of the game. And it was like, well, in the old days, they might have stuck with you and helped everyone else get leveled up, but they decided that they wanted to go off and join another guild that had players like that. And so I wasn't too worried about it because at the end of the day, I've set myself up as the main tank of the guild. So whenever we get there is when we get there. And I know for a fact that I'm never going anywhere. So it's a safe bet for me because we will always have a raid tank. And even though a raid is made up of many people and everyone is important on a raid, the number one most important player for any raid guild is the main tank. Because if you don't have a main tank, you can't tank
Yeah.
encounters. So that's always been my strategy is if I'm the main tank, I'm there 100% of the time unless I'm sick. So I know that we're always guaranteed to do the content and I don't have to worry about people, or at least I don't have to worry about the most important person guild hopping. But it is something that guild hopping was definitely a big thing even in EverQuest because, like you said, the way I play these days is far more casual to the way I used to play, and I'm definitely in that group now where we're 2 months into the game and we're mid 30s, late 30s, mid to late 30s, and then we have, excuse me, another group of people who are in their mid 50s in the guild, and they play a lot more frequently. They play every single night. So the difference between someone playing every single night and someone playing 3 nights a week is that they're mid 50s and I'm mid 30s. But then we had the people who were playing like 12 hours every night who were level 50 within the first 10 days of the game.
Mhm.
Um, the question I had, and I'm rambling now off topic a little bit, because I know that when we look at what we're trying to do with Saga, we definitely appreciate the old school way of progression, which is um, in order to get to kill the dragon, you must first have the resist gear to allow you to survive his breath weapons. And in order to
Mhm.
get the resist gear, you're going to have to do these quests and run these dungeons. And in order to run these quests and run these dungeons, you're going to first have to get good crafted gear. And in order to get good crafted gear, you're going to have to do the crafting grind and do the dungeons and etc. So it's a clear line of progression in terms of gear. And we're also doing things a little bit differently in our game where most MMORPGs, you're getting lots and lots of hit points as you go along. So gear
Mhm.
gear is important, but it's not necessarily the be all end all. Whereas our game, we're doing more of an old school Dungeons and Dragons approach, or an old school tabletop approach, where your hit points, you might gain a little, but you're not going to be gaining thousands of hit points. You start off with 30, 40, max level player might have 150. But what the difference is going to be is the gear that you're getting. And you need gear because the gear is what allows you. It's no different than being a knight in the Middle Ages. The difference between a peasant and a knight on horseback is that the peasant is literally in, cloth rags and doesn't know how to use weaponry, and the knight has been trained. He has a horse, he has a full plate of armor, and he can go into battle and sustain heavy hits and take archery fire and get behind a shield, and these are things that are important to us. But we've looked at the way of flagging content and we appreciate that. But then there's the flip side of things, like what you said, which is trying to make things more socially available to people, um, because there is a certain, I guess the thing I'm thinking about here is there is a certain aspect of, and I've used this example in the past, everyone has access to bicycles. I don't like to compete when I ride a bicycle. I just want to get on a bike, go to the park, ride around with my wife, maybe have a picnic, um, have a nice relaxing day on a bicycle. I'm a casual cyclist. Then you
Mhm.
have then you have the guys who own a bike and they ride a bicycle to stay in shape. So they ride 4 or 5 times a week. They do these 20-kilometer rides, 40-kilometer rides, and they do it to stay in shape. And they get a personal sense of accomplishment from doing that. These are more of the, I wouldn't, the mid-core audience. They're not hardcore, but they're progressive. They're actually, they own a bike, they're
Mhm.
doing it every single day. And then you have like cyclists who compete, and they spend $4 or $5,000 on a bike, and they do competitions, and they're into the ranking system, and they're either amateur or professional, wherever they're at. Those are like the raiders. And then
Mhm.
at the top of that list are the Olympic athletes, who are like elite. They're the world firsts. They're the ones breaking world records and setting times and everything else. In that category, there's lots of room for people who enjoy bicycles. But if you ever want to be doing raid content, you have to be willing to become an elite cyclist and put yourself through the rigor and the routine of becoming an actual competing cyclist. Like, you're never going to get there just by doing it on the weekends, or even just doing it 4 or 5 days a week for your health. Like, if you want to actually do it at the professional level, that means being professional about it. So there's lots of room on that scale, and everybody has access to bikes, but yet only a small percentage of people will ever actually see that top level, because only a certain level, a certain small percentage of people have that drive. That's the way
Mhm.
I've always looked at it. And I know on the flip side of that, you have all the people who like to say that, well, it's not fair that I can't do the raid content because I don't have 40 hours a week. Eh,
Yes and no. There's you know different way of doing. World of Warcraft has solved that problem by making different
Tiers.
difficulties of red.
Yeah.
So you have the mythic one, which is for the hardcorest. So that's where all the competition and the world first will take on. Then you have the flexible raids, which are normal and heroic, which is 2 level of difficulty. And I will say that heroic difficulty is kind of, it's a good difficulty. It's a difficulty for the average player that want to push a bit. So it's accessible to everyone. But you need to make the efforts, right? And then you have, for the extra casual, you have the looking for red, which is, in my opinion, a joke and an insult to raiding. But whatever, this is really to allow the people that, are playing like once a week to see the red content. And I'm actually find myself in the position where I will maybe have to use this to just see the face of the boss and just see how look the place. And I'm considering, okay, I know that the red itself will absolutely not bring me any sort of challenge and that I will not know the fight, but I will just have the look of the place. I will put my feet into it and see, oh, that's the red is like that. Oh, the dungeon is like it. And is it a good solution? Is it a bad one? I don't know. Before I was like not happy about it. And now I'm considering, yeah, maybe it's kind of cool for the people that just want to know the end of the story, just want to see the last boss that
You
I have heard about
just
in the quest,
you just said something very
and that's it.
important, and I remember the conversation that we had before, because you had mentioned, I think we had, I don't know if it's a conversation that you and I had one on one, or it's just a conversation that our team had,
Mm-hmm.
when I was discussing, in my mind, I appreciate the way Lord of the Rings Online did it, which is the storyline of the game is locked behind group based and raid based encounters in terms of the Volume 1 storyline. Obviously, there's many other storylines that players can participate in. There's dungeon storylines, city storylines, the Thieves Guild quests. I mean, there's lots of content for players to go through. But as far as the main story goes, if you want to be someone who participates in that main story all the way to completion, I'm of the mentality that it needs to be, that's the Olympic level content. Like, that's what's there. That's why we have the raids. The raids are there for that encounter. And I'm not a, this is me personally, and
Yeah, I remember.
this is me going, I want that content to be locked behind walls. The downside to that is what you just said. Not everyone is going to be able to access the storyline. I don't
And
necessarily think that's a bad thing, but I'm also different in that perspective because I don't think everyone should have. I don't believe in participation trophies, basically.
no,
Um,
but yeah, that's why I am on the opposite side, and very strongly, because the storyline for some player, it's what's make them want to play the game for
the
a certain
lore,
type of
yeah.
player. Weirdly enough, this type of player very often are not the most competitive people. The most competitive people are the people that's like organizing themselves, having their best gear. They very often don't give a shit about the story. They just want the loot, they want the challenge, they want the world first, they want, this feeling of completion, but the story, they don't give a crap. While a lot of casual players really, really like the story, and for them it's very important. And to have this content specifically locked from them because it requires you to be part of an organization guild, an organized guild, or to put a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of skills. Some people are just not super talented at playing video games. It also happens. And they will not have what makes them want to play the game. So I prefer personally the system that Elder Scrolls Online is doing, which is all of the stories available for the most casual player possible. You have the red, but they have another story. So you're never really missing out. You're not missing out the best content. The villain of your story, anyone can access to it and kill it and face the bad guy at the end and have this feeling of I have completed the story. If they want to do a red, if they want to do hardcore content, if they want to do something really difficult, they will find it, but the story will be different. It's a separated story from the main storyline.
Hmm.
So you will never have this feeling of I have missed out all the content because I am not a good player, I'm not in a good guild, or I do not have the time to put it into.
I think that something that really appeals to me is one of the reasons that I wanted to play World of Warcraft Classic so much is to see firsthand um, some of these major events where the entire server community needed to come together to progress the server to the next stage or to unlock
Mhm.
the next expansion. And so that's something that I've been toying with in my mind as perhaps a way that I might do the storyline progression for Volume 1 in the sense that as opposed to it necessarily being things that guilds need to do, obviously there can be steps that guilds need to complete to progress, but I think in my mind another option would be to have the main storyline of the game be something that requires the server as a whole to
Yeah.
participate in order to advance the storyline, which means anybody from a single player up to the raid guilds have a chance to participate, and it requires all of them working together to
I
progress through the storyline at different places and to do specific things in order to unlock the storyline and get to the next expansion.
I think that's really it's a super good point. I'm very excited about this point of view because one of my best memory is this Ankh-Rush chain quest that you
Yeah.
have in World of Warcraft. When Ankh-Rush was on my servers and every server had a different progression, I was always in the lobby kind of people. So I never had the chance to participate, and I don't even know at this day what were the steps that you were required to do to unlock those doors when you were in a high level guild and you were max level and stuff like this. But I remember that I was, contributing with my little peace bloom and I was putting it in the box, and then I had my little bandages, which is the crappiest things you can have. But I participated, and then you had these big things that everyone were talking about all the time, and you had a way of participating, and I think that you can do things even better than Anchorage has been done by World of Warcraft, where people can do quests whatever their level are. They are just story quests, and so they don't really need to be super high level, and then you will have a part of the quest or this wall event to unlock it that will maybe require something more difficult, more challenging for the higher level. They may need to find super hard material, like high end game material or equipment, or crafting stuff, but this is not really a full story. This was not me the, you know, the most. You see the difference.
Yeah,
So I think there is a way of structuring something in a way where the main plots, maybe not every chapters, but you can make sense of the quest while even be a casual lobby players.
I think it's important to try to, from my perspective, to try to hit as many milestones as you can in terms of, I don't necessarily think that all content needs to be available for all players. I think there definitely should be tiers, but at the same time, I think developers should be going out of their way to try to create as much content as possible that is accessible by as many people as possible. Because obviously that's just smart business sense, because the more people that play your game and the more people who have fun in your game, it's more revenue for your company, which means more growth, it's more employees, it's more profit for the people who are there and need the money, and that's how people get paid. Um, so it's important to try to, even if you're a group-based game, to not be too inclusive. Otherwise, I think you run the risk of having what happened to WildStar happen, which is a game that tried to push people too much in one direction in terms of everything was kind of focused on the end game rating, and yeah, there was lots of other stuff to do, but the main focus was on that component, which ultimately many people suggest. I don't know if it's true or not. There are many factors in the downfall of that game, but I know that many people suggest that the main reason that it went the way it did was because they tried to force people into doing only raid content. And I like to look at the way, even before Lord of the Rings Online went free to play, um, it wasn't all raid content for the main storyline. It was just group based content. So there was components that were single player that you could do on your own. There were components where you needed 2 or 3 people, and there were components where you needed 6 people, but you never needed more than 6 people for a long time to do any of the storyline content. Eventually they got to the point where they had 12-man raids, which I don't think 12-man content is horribly restrictive, but World of Warcraft, for example, requiring even EverQuest 2, we had 24-man encounters. So getting 24 people together on a regular basis is
It's very
it's
hard.
quite a challenge, because you need at
Yeah.
least 30 people in the guild to. We had 35 for like 7 years. We ran with 35 people, 32 to 35. We only ever lost 3 people in 7 years, but that was just, we had a roster that was 10, 7 to 10 more than what we actually needed to raid, because somebody's always, kids got a play or a ballerina thing, and wife needs to go to the hospital and you got to go, or I'm just not feeling good today, I need to take a break. Everybody's going to have a reason why they're not going to play all the time. Um, and so having an extra 10 people on the side who can fill in for the people who can't go on a night is a good thing. But 40 man raids in Warcraft is really hard to get 40 people together. And I remember back in EverQuest 1 needing 70 people, for some encounters was just, I mean, that's when you're going to the server and just saying, anybody who wants to come, or you're having a roster of like 200 people in your guild, which I've never enjoyed, because then you don't know anybody. I really prefer having
Hmm.
relationships with people.
I think it's important to have content for everyone. Indeed, I think that it's important to remember that the hardcore people are maybe 5% of the
It's a very
population of a
small
game,
population, yeah.
or even less. Though, so it makes sense then the most important content is available to the largest population. And I believe that the main story of a game is something that should be accessible to a casual player. So he can see the end of the game. So he will want to play the game and continue to do it because he know he can have this feeling of completion by finishing and knowing the end of the story.
And I think Lord of the Rings Online did a good approach to that, in the sense that they combined single player with small group and full group. So you never needed more than like 6 people, as opposed to, say, a game like WildStar where you need a big group of people to do even the storyline content. So we're gonna have to figure out where our balance lies with the Saga Lucemia and figure out where we're gonna do it from there. But on that
Yeah.
note, I know we're running long, so I want to ask everybody in the community, what are some of your favorite expansions from what games and why? We've discussed some of ours in this episode, some of the experiences that took us back to our early days in MMORPGs, but I'm really interested to hear from people in terms of what they really think is a good expansion as opposed to a launch title. Because a launch for a game is different than an expansion. At the launch you're getting 40 zones and 10 dungeons and 6 races, and you're expected to have a good, you know, hopefully a year's worth of content, if not more, out of that. But expansions, many people, especially in the days of today, like Ella was talking about, where expansions have gone more the route of, say, seasons or chapters or these quarterly content drops. What is your preferred way? Do you like a big content drop every 12 months, every 2 years, or do you like that quarterly drop rate? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell button, etc., etc., etc.
Take care of yourself
We will see
and have a
you
very
all
good day.
in the next episode.
Bye.